ישועתי, לך נאה לשבח. תיכון בית תפילתי, ושם תודה נזבח.
When, where, and why. These three words that I have selected for the title of this devar are interrogative. All three questions apply to the events that led up to and immediately followed the story of Hanukkah, which is why, in the readings this morning, we looked at portions from 1 Maccabees, chapters 1 through to 4. That tells us when it happened, in 167 to 164 BCE. It told us where it happened, in Jerusalem, and the rest of Judea. But why? That it does not tell us. So that's where I want to consider today why it happened. Now, the lead up to Hanukkah. Our reading of Maccabees this morning told us both the when and the where. Looking at the why, firstly, why did Yahweh allow Antiochus Epiphanes to desecrate the second temple and to sacrifice pigs on the altar, stripping away all the gold and the treasures of the temple, and by forcing the people of Yehuda to discard the observance of Torah and its commands? Secondly, why did Antiochus Epiphanes find it necessary to desecrate the temple in Jerusalem? In answering these two questions, it is necessary to step back in history to the time when Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire, and that introduced the Greek culture to the Near Eastern world. Alexander and his conquest ended 204 years of Persian rulership of Yehuda, following their return after the Babylonian exile. However, within 10 years, Alexander was dead, and having fathered no children, his empire was divided between his 4 generals, a quarter each. But later, that was divided into 2 portions. Egypt to the south, under the rulership of Ptolemy, and the Seleucid Empire in the north, centered around modern Syria. The latter was ruled by Seleucus, who was a son of one of Alexander's 4 generals. He established his capital in the city Syrian Antioch. In the early years of the battle raged constantly between the north and the south territories. And of course, Yehuda was caught in the middle. Both rulers, Ptolemy and the Seleucids, claimed sovereignty over the territory of Yehuda. As the battles raged between these 2 empires, the Hellenistic culture continued to spread throughout the Near East for the first time in history. That was the period when the people of Yehuda first were exposed to the Gentiles of the West. When Babylon was destroyed by Medo-Persia, they went back to the land, and they remained there for that 204 years until Alexander the Great came. Now, that was the first time that somebody had come from the West and impacted upon Israel. Hence, many people in Yehuda, starting from the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and working downwards through the people, they became totally enamored with this new and completely different culture and lifestyle. As a direct result, many turned their backs on Torah and their Hebrew culture in favor of the new and exciting way of life. In 175 BCE, following the ascension of Antiochus Epiphanes, the Kohen Gadol was Onias III, but he was stood down in favor of his brother Jason, who had bribed Epiphanes with a large sum of money in exchange for the high priesthood. Epiphanes accepted the bribe and allowed Jason to become the Kohen Gadol. As a result, he also went ahead and built a gymnasium in Jerusalem, thereby transforming the city into a copy of the Seleucid capital, Antioch. Regarding the name of Jason, which of course is his Greek name, Josephus tells us that before he became Hellenized, his name was none other than Yeshua. He wasn't the king, but his name was Yeshua. As a political appointee, Jason, as the new Kohen Gadol, divided the people of Jerusalem and slowly abandoned the treaty that had been made between the people of Yehuda and Antiochus III, that's the father of Epiphanes. In that treaty, Antiochus III had agreed that Yehuda would continue to live in accordance with the principles of Torah. However, unlike his father, Epiphanes wanted Yehuda to become wholly and solely Hellenistic and to reflect the rest of the Seleucid Empire, with no further reference or regard for the Torah. Hence, Jason was the man who sold out to the whims of Epiphany. However, 4 years later, Jason's time as the Kohen Gadol was brought to an abrupt end in 171 BCE. He, Jason, sent a man by the name of Menelaus to deliver the annual tribute to Epiphanes. Upon meeting with Epiphanes, Menelaus seized the opportunity to outbid Jason for the priesthood. And Menelaus was duly installed as the high priest in place of Jason. Menelaus held the place of Kohen Gadol between 171 and 161 BCE. That is, of course, right through the time when the temple lay desecrated. It was also recorded that early in the term of office of Menelaus, he removed all the sacred vessels and utensils from the temple stores and used them to meet the monetary obligations he had imposed upon himself upon outbidding Jason for the high priest's role. That act came to the ears of the earlier deposed high priest Onias III, who made it publicly known that Menelaus was robbing the temple. However, Menelaus continued plundering the temple treasures until violence finally broke out in the midst of Yehuda. Meanwhile, Jason, having never abandoned the claim to high priesthood, seized the opportunity to again take control of Jerusalem, which forced Menelaus to seek refuge in the city's citadel. The transfer of power occurred while Epiphanes was waging war in Egypt. However, Epiphanes was forced by the Romans to withdraw from Egypt, so he marched back against Jerusalem, massacred many of the inhabitants, as we read, and plundered the temple, regarding the actions of Jason as an affront to his very majesty. Epiphanes, having been defeated in battle in Egypt, with its troops needing to be paid, took advantage of the civil unrest in Yehuda and used that as an excuse to desecrate the temple and attempt to fully Hellenize the city of Jerusalem and the rest of Yehuda. So according to the second book of Maccabees, Shimon, the brother of Menelaus, let it be known that there was a vast wealth in the temple treasury in Jerusalem. Epiphanes, using that knowledge, plundered Jerusalem and to pay for his vanquished troops. Epiphanes stripped the temple of its sacred vessels, including, of course, the 7-branch golden menorah, and stole the silver and gold and all the coins. He also placed a statue of Zeus in the midst of the temple, the god whom he believed manifest himself. He also sacrificed pigs on the altar. Then came the rebellion of the Maccabees. Not by might, not by power, but by the hand of Yahweh, Yehuda Maccabee, along with his 4 brothers and the others who joined their guerrilla army, managed in 3 short years to overthrow the mighty armies of the Seleucid Empire and Antiochus Epiphanes. In 164 BCE, Jerusalem and all of Yehuda was returned to the sovereignty of Yahweh their God. Peace and order once again prevailed in Eretz Israel, and the Torah, along with the worship of Yahweh, was again restored to its rightful place. The love affair with Hellenism had failed, The Hebraic culture was once again prevailing throughout the territory of Yehuda. The intrigue surrounding the Kohen Gadol during the period leading up to the attack by Epiphanes came about because the men who were claiming to be serving Yahweh as their God were at the same time synchronizing with Hellenism. Now, syncretism served their purposes and desires totally because they wanted to be part of this new culture of the Greeks. Like the kings of Israel and Yehuda during the first temple period, Jason and Menelaus led the people far away from Torah and the worship of Yahweh by their acts of religious and cultural syncretism. The civil unrest following their corruption of the priesthood filtered throughout the territory of Yehuda. That is the answer to that third question, as to the why these events occurred and why the temple had to be rededicated, which is the call of Hanukkah. So the later significance of Hanukkah. If Yahweh had not enabled the Maccabees to overpower the armies of Antiochus Epiphanes, Yehuda would have become completely assimilated into the Hellenistic system of the Greco-Roman world. And the prophecies that had pointed forward to the birth of Yeshua would never have occurred the way they had been written. Even though the events of Maccabees 1 and 2 do not form part of the scriptural narrative, they do confirm that yet again Yahweh has always had control over his people, even though he uses Gentile nations to discipline his people Israel. However, no nation has ever retained rulership over Israel beyond the time frame that Yahweh is prepared to allow. If we reflect on history of the nations, we see that Yahweh had used 7 empires to control the errant ways of Israel. But not one of those 7 has survived as a world empire. The 7 empires are Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and then finally the Ottoman Empire. All rose and fell. Each was a superpower during its own portion of history. Each one was used by Yahweh to bring civil unrest or civil war within the nation of Israel under control. However, when an empire became self-appointed overlords of Israel, Yahweh immediately reduced them to a much lower level, and they were conquered by the next empire. That same pattern continued through history for all 7. So where does it leave us in the 21st century? Currently, there are 3 superpowers clamoring to dominate the empires of the world. They are, of course, USA, Russia, and China. And yet none, not one of them, has ever impacted directly upon or controlled Israel. Those 3 modern superpowers, along with a remnant of the 7 historical empires, together with many other modern nations, collectively constitute a single world body known today, of course, as the United Nations. How Yahweh will deal with those nations, jointly or singularly, is something for the future. And it is best for us not to speculate how history will be played out, because as Yahweh has shown on many occasions, he uses mysterious ways to bring about what he wants in relationship to Israel, and we cannot predict it in advance. We look back with hindsight to all that has been written, but we can't look forward with certainty. However, what we do know is that in his own due time, Yahweh will send Yeshua. He will return and bring all the nations to account for their past actions towards both Israel and the Torah. Hence, there is no place for any religious syncretism of any kind. It is totally unacceptable to Yahweh, and anyone who has a place within or alongside Israel must remain completely clear of all religious syncretism, whether it be to Hellenism or any other form of religion that rejects Torah. Furthermore, as Talmudim of Yeshua, we must always embrace our relationship with the Mashiach in his truly Hebrew context. And that is why we celebrate this festival of Hanukkah every year. Hanukkah Sameach. Have a happy Hanukkah.